Now, I would argue what changed was morality. What changed was there was a move for a variety of both intellectual and economic and political and historical reasons. There was a move towards a lowering of barriers for trade, a respect for property rights and contract, and a general diminishment in the random violence in society. And that is really the source of wealth. It's not just the fact that people move their arms. They've been doing that throughout all of human history.
The reason wealth productivity went up during the 18th century was because of the Industrial Revolution, because people invented machines, built factories, built conveyor lines, automated and processed the labor, refinement, built steam engines and coal plants, and it, revitalized global trade. There are a number of factors, material.
But why did they do all of that?
Well,
I mean, the ancient Romans knew about the steam engine. The ancient Romans
could not have kickstarted the Industrial Revolution.
To create the Industrial Revolution, but they didn't. Why? Because they all owned slaves. It took the shattering of serfdom. It took the shattering of the ancient practice.
We had the Industrial
slavery,
Revolution in America when they owned slaves.
Wait,
Americans owned slaves when the Industrial Revolution took place in America. You can simultaneously own slaves and develop an industrial revolution. They couldn't have developed an industrial revolution back during the Roman times. The technology just wasn't there. I agree there are ideological components.
No, that's not true. No, this looks like, I mean, I don't mean to pull credentials here because it's all nonsense. I got a whole history of Rome presentation, graduate degree in history. Oh, no.
I'm well aware of what you speak on Rome.
They could have done it, but they didn't want to invent labor-saving devices because they had invested all of their capital into slaves. So when you invest your capital into slaves, you don't want to create labor-saving devices
because it diminishes the value of your slave. Each slave cost about the equivalent of a medium expensive car in the modern West. And so there were very strong political and economic reasons to do with the immorality of slave ownership that had to do with why. Now, there was slaves, of course, in America, and the North industrialized faster, got wealthier faster because they didn't have slaves, and it was the British, in particular the British Empire, that worked feverishly in the late 18th, 19th century to end slavery, not just in England, not just in the British Empire, but around the world. Worked very, very hard, and like would grab the slave ships and free the slaves and lock up the slave owners, and worked very, very hard. It was largely a Christian mission, of course, but they worked very, very hard to end slavery. So the fact that America had slavery, well, America inherited the Industrial Revolution to a large degree from England, which was largely serf and slave free by the time it started, and the industrialized North had a far greater economic progress than the slave-owning South, so I don't see how the example of America does anything but reinforce the thesis.
Okay, so a number of points here. For one, there have been plenty of labor-saving devices that were invented over the time when slavery was commonplace in civilizations across the world. The printing press, the cotton gin, numerous inventions which were meant to make agriculture easier, a field that slaves almost exclusively were presided over, of course, back when agriculture was, the industry of the day, medieval Europe. There is certainly a relationship between the development of the Industrial Revolution and the existence of slaves. But the idea that Rome could have had
the existence or the diminishment of slavery.
Well, both, I suppose. The diminishment of, because I agree there is a proportional relationship between the industrialization of society and the reduction of reliance on slave labor. But the idea that Rome could have just decided to do one, and then it took us 2,000 years to decide, actually, what if machines are better than enslaving humans?
I didn't say Rome could have decided to do it. I said that they had slaves, which you just admitted.
They had slaves and they had labor-saving devices.
Was essential for the development of industrialization.
Civilizations have had
a decision arbitrarily. It's based upon the foundational morals and economics of the ancient world.
Civilizations have had slaves and they've had labor-saving devices for as long as both have existed. When the Industrial Revolution took place, the material wealth and the productivity of our societies increased massively, but it wasn't because everyone just decided that it was moral to start doing so. It was because of the incredible ingenuity of inventors and the hard work of the people who manned those factories that civilizations pulled themselves into the industrial era. I reject this assertion that it was a moral zeitgeist or a moral paradigm shift that led to the overwhelming increase in the productivity of human beings.
All right, so let it just be noticed that Vaush has said that he just rejects it. Okay, good. Well, I reject your rejection, and we've completely solved the problem. You just have to say, I reject. Okay.
Well, I provided a counter argument. If you'd like to provide a counter to my counter.
You just said that there were machines in the ancient world. Well, of course there were. I mean, you could have carried water, or you could have had an aqueduct. You could have dragged things along through a forest, or you could have built a road. Of course there was labor-saving devices in the ancient world. So what? I mean, the fact is there still was not this massive liftoff and takeoff of human wealth. And for that, you require
the Industrial Revolution.
Efficiency. The idea that it was the laborers within in the factory that produced the wealth, when laborers in the fields before, the slave laborers in the fields were working even harder than the factory workers were in the Industrial Revolution, and for, of course, less pay, because they virtually got no pay. They got room and board and some rudimentary health care, and that's about it. So the idea that it was human labor that somehow drove it is to say, well, I guess they just worked 10 times harder than the slaves did, and they didn't. No, it's nothing to do with that.
It was not a
The fact
sudden
is that
decision
when
to
labor
start.
starts, hang on, I'll finish in a
All right.
sec. I'll finish in a sec.
When labor starts to cost money, rather than you just buy a slave and then you buy and burn that slave until they, I guess you don't even want a pension, you just burn them out till they die. But when labor starts to cost money, then the first thing you want to do is start investing in labor-saving devices. And that harnesses and extends and expands the power of the laborer. The economic efficiency of the laborer is vastly enhanced by being attached to a factory machine that does a huge amount more work for him.
Now, and so when labor costs money, you start saving money by introducing labor-saving devices. That frees up labor to do other work that is more productive and adds to the value of society as a whole.
So again, to clarify, labor-saving devices have been invented as quickly as the people of their time could for as long as humans have been around, including the time when we owned slaves. While there is undeniably a relationship between the economic value of a labor-saving device relative to the availability of free labor, that doesn't negate the fact that humans have tried to increase the efficiency of their society for as long as has been possible. And I take issue with this spurious straw man you keep assigning, where you describe the Industrial Revolution as simply workers choosing to work harder. It was workers who are.
I never said workers.
Wait. Hold on, Stefan.
I never said workers.
Let me finish my argument.
What are you talking about?
You said.
It's not a phrase I even used at all.
You just said that my argument was that workers must have started to work 10 times harder to account for the increase in wealth production during the Industrial Revolution.
No, that was a mocking of your argument. That wasn't my argument.
Okay. Well, then to clarify, it has nothing to do with workers suddenly choosing to work harder, and everything to do with workers.
I never said workers
may I please,
Stefan?
What
are you talking about?
I am addressing my own argument and clarifying my position. So to clarify,
well, then why are you saying it's what I said then?
I think you mischaracterized my position.
Well,
okay, so
here's what we should do.
Well, let me. I would like to finish the point before we gallivant and complain about it.
Like, here's my suggestion. Here's how we use our economically productive tools, right? I don't know if you can see me or not. You got a pen, you got a piece of paper, right? So what you do is, if I use a phrase that you want to take issue with, which is obviously perfectly fine, that's the point of a debate, you can jot down the phrase, because I'm telling you, man, relying on your memory is not working, because
I trust the people who are watching to remember you as you said it. And if my chat would like to rise up and say that he did indeed characterize my argument in that way, you are all free to. But until that point, I would like to say that it has nothing to do with workers just deciding to work harder, and everything to do with some workers who are inventors or politicians, which is in itself a form of work, who developed the labor-saving devices of the Industrial Revolution, which then allowed the workers, working as always, to increase the productivity of our society. It has nothing to do with people choosing to work harder. It has nothing to do with a moral paradigm shift. It has everything to do with a change in the material circumstances of our society and how it allows our workers to increase their productive efficiency. We continue to see this today. The existence of the internet has revolutionized the material efficiency of our society. This has nothing to do with a moral paradigm shift. It's simply new technology allowing for us to create and distribute in new and inventive ways. Always, of course, this is being done by people who work. And it is for that reason I credit them for the bountiful society we now find ourselves within.
Okay, so you've accepted that the end of slavery helped make workers more productive, but you don't consider it a moral paradigm shift for slavery to have ended, so I guess you don't view it as an improvement in human morality for slavery to have ended? I'm not quite sure I follow.
I don't think people abandoned slavery for machinery as a more efficient form of economic production for moral reasons. I think they did it for material reasons, because you can make more money from a factory than you ever could from a plantation. Of course, this is somewhat simplified. You know, the actual particularities of economics are incredibly complicated, but generally speaking, the Industrial Revolution de-emphasized the necessity of slavery. I don't think that slavery is a good thing. I'm glad it's gone, but I don't think we made that transition for moral reasons.
Why don't you think the transition was made for moral reasons?
Because in every society...
I mean, sorry to ask a question and just interrupt. I get that there's pecuniary advantage in getting rid of slavery. I get that it's more efficient and all of that. But to say that are you saying there were no moral considerations in the abolitionistic movement?
In the abolitionist movement, certainly, but they weren't doing it for economic reasons. The people who built the factories weren't doing it because they knew they would be replacing slaves and that would be freeing the slaves. The people who built factories wanted to make money. The abolitionists weren't doing abolitionist work for the benefit of their economy. They were doing it for moral reasons. They, of course, had a moral incentive. But factory owners, the inventors who built these machines and industry lines, I don't think they did it because they knew their machines would allow for the emancipation of slaves.
I mean, it would be great if everyone woke up as you do, as I do, as a lot of these listeners do. They woke up in the morning and thought, gosh, how can I best serve the world today? How can I best make the world a better place for people in harm and people in suffering and all of that? It would be great if people woke up every day and thought that way. Some do, a lot don't. And the good news, of course, is that in a sort of communist system, in a tyrannical system, the people who want to profit, they do so on mountains and rivers of blood, whereas in a free market economy, the people who want to profit can't force you to buy their goods and have to appeal in some way.
All right, we are so off the original topic now. I would like to return and perhaps conclude this tangent on the Industrial Revolution. So to be perfectly clear, the Industrial Revolution took place because material, not moral circumstances, allowed for a massive increase in the productivity of civilization. This change in our productivity did change the economics of slavery, which upended many of the slave-oriented businesses that existed alongside and even after the Industrial Revolution, because, of course, the Industrial Revolution took place before the abolition of slavery in many places. What's more, slavery continues to exist to this day across the world. We saw other forms of exploitative labor come alongside the Industrial Revolution, such as child labor, such as workers being stacked in tenements, spotting out 8 or 9 babies because they knew that at 12 they would have to send them off to the factories because it was the only way to afford their company-owned tenancy. The idea that the Industrial Revolution was part of some moral surge towards the free market and individualism and proprietarianism is ridiculous, because the Industrial Revolution had comparable effects in societies that hadn't seen the free market touch them for a century afterwards. The Industrial Revolution had the exact same effect on Soviet Russia, as few and far between as the rights for workers were there at the time. They nonetheless saw a comparable increase in the productivity of our society, because it has nothing to do, and I need to make this perfectly clear, nothing to do with the free market, with a moral decision to evolve into, laissez-faire economics, and everything to do with material circumstances of society changing. Labor-saving devices have been produced for as long as humans have been ingenious enough to produce them. Slaves have existed since the beginning of humanity up until now. These are parallel but not intersecting courses of material and moral considerations, and merging the two of them errantly, carelessly, only serves to dilute an understanding of the actual driving forces of history.